I think the real tragedy is we've not regulated based on addictive potential. We don't worry about the addictive potential. Parents are not concerned when they look at a video game, what they look for is a gun. There can be flowers and pots and kitty cats, and your kid can still be addicted to it for 20 hours a day, and it can still ruin their life. And no generation in the history of humanity has ever had to deal with something as invasive and addictive and pervasive as technology. So this whole generation of parents, this is a very unique challenge that we're all dealing with, and no one knows how to fix it.
Welcome to the Minimal Mom Podcast. Dawn reaches 1 million women each month with practical tips to simplify your home. Today, Dawn is joined by Dr. Kanojia, a former gaming addict and a Harvard-trained psychiatrist who has developed evidence-based programs that help tens of thousands of gamers overcome their addiction and reclaim their attention and time from technologies that consume it. His new book, How to Raise a Healthy Gamer, will equip parents with the tools to fight back, an understanding of how technology affects the developing brain and a child's developing psyche, and, more importantly, a toolkit for parents helping a child have a healthy relationship with technology.
Dr. K, I have to say, when I saw your book, How to Raise a Healthy Gamer, one of the first thoughts that came to my mind is, can we put these two words together, healthy and gamer? Because I know for many of us, our personal experience and then that with raising kids in our house these days is that there is conflict, there is tension, there are screen time battles, and we don't always like the impact that we're seeing these games have on our kids. And so I'm really looking forward to having this conversation with you today. So can you tell us, how did you first become interested in this topic?
Well, so I struggled a lot with video game addiction myself. Basically started struggling a lot in high school, but I was playing a lot kind of growing up, like preteen years, and then failed out of college. And then went to India to go find myself and spent about 7 years studying to become a monk. And then I met my wife, and the whole celibacy thing was not going to work out. And so decided to come back to the world, and then actually decided to become a doctor. So I was a lot more centered and sort of focused on medicine for a while.
And did your video game addiction or habit, was that part of the cause of you dropping out of college?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, 100%. So I think that was why I failed out. So I was just playing video games for 20 hours a day and just skipping all my classes and skipping finals and just failing at straight Fs for like a solid year, and then tried to recover my GPA and things like that.
And were you the exception, or did you see this happening to your peers too?
I think I was probably more of the exception. So, there's always a group of kids that don't do great freshman year. But I think back when I was in college, which was like the early 2000s, gaming addiction was not that bad. Games were not nearly as addictive as they are today.
Interesting.
So I think I was more of the exception back then.
So you came back to the US and then you decided to become a doctor. So you did that was a huge turnaround of your life.
Yeah, it was a huge turnaround, and it took a long time. So it took me 3 years to get into medical school. I applied for 3 years in a row and basically got rejected like 120 times. And just kind of kept with it. And then eventually got accepted to one medical school, which was Tufts University School of Medicine. And then towards the end of my med school time, I really got fascinated by psychiatry. So ended up doing my psychiatry training at Harvard. And when I was there, talked to my mentors about like gaming addiction. So this was like 2015 or so about 10 years ago. And I started asking them like, hey, what do y'all think about gaming addiction, technology addiction? And it wasn't that the academic field wasn't too interested in it back then. We were in the middle of like an opioid crisis. And that's when I kind of realized that like, if you look at the leaders in the field of psychiatry, they're in their like 50s, 60s, and 70s. Okay. And they have never played a video game.
Okay.
Right? So they really don't have a personal experience of it. So, that's what really when I got interested in it. And then I started helping gamers. So basically younger versions of myself who were like in their 20s, and then trying to help them kind of get back on track and not fail out of college and things like that. And then as we grew, parents started contacting us. Hey, I have a 22-year-old son, finished college, has never had a job. Like he's been sitting at home for 9 months and just plays video games all day. I don't know what to do. So then we started helping parents.
Okay.
And then eventually that's what turned into the book.
Yeah. So describe for us, how has the landscape of video games, what changes have you seen from the early 2000s to the games kids are playing today?
Oh, I mean, it's like night and day. So I think that games were so minimally addictive 20 years ago, and they are so intentionally addictive across so many different aspects of addiction. So everyone thinks about dopamine.
Yeah.
But I think that dopamine is just the tip of the iceberg. So what I tend to find, if you look at any addictive substance or any addiction, it does two things. It gives pleasure and it takes away pain. And it's really that latter thing that keeps people trapped in the cycle. So what happened with me was that as I was failing out, I knew I was ruining my life and I didn't know how to deal with that. I didn't know how to fix that. So the worse my life became, the more I retreated into the gaming.
Wow.
So what we're starting to see with video games is that they're starting to address more of our psychological needs. So it used to be that a game was just about fun. And then maybe there's some degree of negative emotional suppression, which is what creates the cycle of my life is falling apart, but I need to suppress that. So I'm going to play more, which makes my life fall apart more. But now we're seeing all these other complex things that people get addicted to. So a good example is community. So, now you can have your entire social circle can be online.
Yeah.
So the fundamental need for human beings to connect with other human beings can now be fulfilled by a video game. And that's the basic issue. That's a huge problem, is that as we go on, game developers are figuring out, of the things that a human being needs from life, how many of them can we give them in a video game?
Right. And as a parent, I think, our kids don't play games where you do them with other people. But I've heard parents say like, well, they're playing video games, but they're doing it with a group of friends. And I look in the basement and I'm like, but there's no friends down there. And I'm like, oh, right, virtually. I mean, it used to be my cousins and I at Christmas time, we would pile on their couch and we're all passing around the controllers. And that actually was kind of like a community thing. Like we had fun and we took turns. But is this pseudo community? Is this actually meeting a community need?
So yes and no. So I think that it is a very genuine community in a lot of ways. So for example, I started playing video games with someone when I was 15. And then literally 13 years later, I'd never met the guy and I invited him to my wedding. So when I was failing out of college, we were hanging out. When I met the woman who would be my wife, we were hanging out. So I would talk to him about her. And I was like, hey, I met this girl and that's why I'm not on so much anymore. So we'd really grown up together. Wow. And this is something that I think a lot of people don't quite appreciate, is that the games that you make online, you carry with you. So when I went to college, I had to leave all my high school friends behind, and then you make a new set of friends. And then when I left college and went to med school, I left all my friends behind and then make new friends there. But your online friends, you carry with you.
Oh, that's interesting.
And so some of the interesting studies show that during the first year of the pandemic, gamers were actually more resilient to the increase in depression and anxiety because we had an online community.
You had a virtual community, sure.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. The downside is that the community that we get online can be authentic in some ways, but it is not complete. So for example, when two human beings meet in person and we hug, we get a little spurt of oxytocin, which relieves our mental health, makes us feel a little bit better, forms bonds. And we can't hug someone across the internet.
Yeah.
So, and that's exactly the problem with gaming, is that it gives us a 50% fulfillment for things that we need in life.
Okay.
And it can't bridge that other 50%.
And does that cause us to keep going back for more, trying to get there, or?
Absolutely. So that's the challenge, is that once we get 50% from somewhere, we stop looking for 100% elsewhere.
Okay.
And this is exactly what the game designers do. They make it so easy to get halfway there, and they make it impossible to go the full way.
Okay.
So what that sort of means is that we actually have to kind of sacrifice to get what we want. We have to stop doing the easy thing, stop doing the easy emotional relief from playing a video game, and then start the work of doing the hard emotional work. And that's what makes it so hard. And our brain doesn't know the difference. Our brain doesn't quite understand, because from a neurochemical perspective, we are getting that dopamine release. We are suppressing our limbic system and our amygdala, which is our negative emotional circuitry. We do feel connected to other people. So it's really challenging.
That's interesting. And then the games themselves, I grew up playing Duck Hunt, Mario Kart. How do they create them to be more addictive now than the games that we grew up with?
So a couple of different things. So the first thing that they've done is they've added layers to the game that scratch these different itches. So what we tend to see is that games give us a sense of identity in the virtual world.
Oh, interesting.
Right. So like they have all these cosmetics and stuff. And so some people like super expensive shoes or purses or whatever. And now we have cosmetics in the video game. And when all the kids play all the games all the time, what they care about is not fancy shoes or sneakers. What they care about is a particular cosmetic. So it's the same thing as like teenage peer pressure. You have to dress fashionably, except since we interact with each other in the virtual world, it's just the cosmetic in the video game that matters.
Wow.
So we see a sense of identity, a sense of community, a lot of safety. All of those things increase the addictive potential. On top of that, we also get a more traditional dopaminergic kind of keep you glued to the screen. So one thing that game designers have gotten really, really good at is kind of titrating our stress and excitement. So if you think about a video game, if the video game is too easy, someone will get bored and leave. If it is too hard, someone will quit, right? And they'll go do something else. So game designers have literally discovered, like through iteration after iteration after iteration, what is the perfect formula of challenge and like
payoff, reward. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Right. So if we look at it societally, like why do we, so like even if you listen to my story, a lot of people are impressed, right? Because I failed out and then I ended up training at Harvard. And that's like, like overcoming adversity. Yes. so everyone values that. And if you stop and think about it, the brain values overcoming adversity. That's why as a society, we applaud cancer survivors, we applaud people who are survivors of trauma, genocide, people who overcome adversity. It's in all of our movies and whatever, right? Things are not super easy for the protagonist. So that fundamental need to overcome adversity, which is evolutionary, now the video game has figured out how to scratch that itch because they create this artificial difficulty. You're designed to win a video game. You're always supposed to win.
Okay.
But they're going to trick you into making it hard. But it's not really hard, right? So it makes it feel hard because you're always designed to win, which life isn't that way. And so now we have two options, right? We can play this video game where there's this super villain who's very powerful and it's going to be very difficult to beat them. But the villain is designed to lose. But it gives you the illusion that you are overcoming something, right? Because from a neurochemical perspective, you are overcoming something. There is adversity. So there are studies that show that it is the denial of reward that leads to powerful video game addiction, not the granting of a reward.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. So when we deny the reward for some amount of time and then we give it, that's what keeps people glued, because it's a whole idea of like, if it's easy, it's not worth anything. So the games have gotten very, very good at titrating even your stress level of they'll bounce between being relaxed and being stressed. So that kind of keeps you at the edge of your seat because you can never truly relax. And if it's constantly stressful, then you're going to feel tired. So they'll even bounce back and forth between that. So they've gotten very sophisticated.
Wow, this is fascinating. And I've said before, I'm a pretty lazy parent when it comes to managing tech. So I kind of take an all or nothing approach where I'm often like, we're just gonna everything you've just said right now. I'm like, why would we even have a video game? So I do want to talk about how we can have some healthy boundaries around this with our kids, and we don't have to be all or nothing. But are there benefits to video games? Should we continue even the conversation of like why we should continue to navigate this, or should we just go and sell them right now and get them out of our house?
Well, it's a great question. So that's where every parent has to decide for themselves. But here's kind of our take on it. So I think the role of a parent is to prepare your child for the world that they're going to live in, right? And so now the question is, let's say you don't have video games for the first 18 years of life. Let's say they go off to college, or when they're 22, they start to they get their own PlayStation. And if they haven't learned how to defend themselves from the addictive nature of technology is only going to get more addictive over the next 10 years.
Because that's true. It's not just video games. We're talking about cell phones, Instagram, anything on your phone is pretty much meant to be addictive.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So this is where I think what we tend to see is that putting our head in the sand and trying to protect our kids from it is not going to be nearly as effective, I believe, long term as teaching your kid how to protect themselves against the invasive nature of technology. And the challenge is that so many parents, it's such a fight that battle does not seem worth it.
Yes.
And parents don't know how to teach their kids restraint instead of restriction. So they default to restriction. And that's where it's not anyone's fault, because if we think about how we learn how to parent, we learn how to parent from our parents. And no generation in the history of humanity has ever had to deal with something as invasive and addictive and pervasive as technology. So this whole generation of parents, this is a very unique challenge that we're all dealing with, and no one knows how to fix it.
I appreciate you mentioning that, because I know this topic can also bring on a lot of guilt for parents. So I appreciate you acknowledging that we have not learned how to manage this with our kids. And so we're all learning together. However, it is something that we need to take seriously. So what are the practical steps that we can start doing as parents to get this under control in our house?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So I think we do a lot of things that are a little bit unorthodox. So let's just start philosophically. So I did a lot of addiction psychiatry work. One of the unfortunate lessons I had to learn is you can't be sober for someone else. I've seen so many people try. I've seen spouses try to force their spouse into sobriety. I've seen parents try to be sober for their kids. You just can't do it. So anytime you're dealing with an addiction, the person who struggles with the addiction has to want to give it up in some way. And this is the thing that's so confusing for parents. Parents think it is impossible for my child to want to play less. That's
Sure.
just, we're not doing it right. So that's what we've sort of discovered. And at this point, I overcame addiction myself. I've helped hundreds, thousands, millions of gamers develop a healthy relationship with gaming. And now we've helped tons and tons of parents do this with their kids. So we're confident that this works. We've run research studies on it, things like that. So this methodology does work. And we also know this in general from addiction psychiatry. So the first step is to get on the same team with your kid. So the basic problem is that y'all are fighting right now. And even if you win, you lose, right? Because anytime there's conflict between parent and child, you may force a behavior temporarily, but you are not garnering independence. And so the challenge that a lot of parents run into is that even though I am winning, it requires my constant attention. It's always a fight. And that we need to stop, because y'all don't have the energy for that. I don't have the energy. No one's got the energy.
I'll do it for a week after I listen to your podcast and I feel really convicted, but then it falls to the wayside.
So the whole foundation of our program is to help kids want to quit the gaming themselves.
Wow.
Because once y'all are on the same team, then things become way, way easier. Now y'all are collaborating, y'all are cooperating. I know it sounds impossible, but hear me out. So the first thing that we encourage parents to do is to understand the neuroscience and psychology of gaming, which is all outlined in the book. Second thing that we ask parents to do is to talk to your kids. So for the first month, tell your kids, hey, we've been fighting over games for like years, right? Like, this is not working. I just want to understand. Help me understand why you want to play, what it's doing for you, what you enjoy about it.
Okay.
And so even letting your kids know that nothing you tell me right now is going to affect me punishing you or taking your game away or anything like that. I really need to understand this as your parent, because this is not working. At the end of the month or after that, I may start setting boundaries. And I think it's worth your while to equip me with information, because if there are certain things that you care about, I'm going to do my best to incorporate those.
So you're really taking a team approach. Like, you're really involving the child in this process.
Absolutely.
Okay,
So this is
cool.
a huge mistake that a lot of parents make, is that parents take the responsibility, which I know sounds kind of weird, and then they'll nag their kid, hey, did you do your homework? Did you do your homework? Did you do your homework? But when you do that, the kid doesn't need to be responsible for their homework, because mom or dad is always there nagging them, making sure it gets done. So what we really want to engender is independence on the part of the child, and an alliance between parent and child. So talk to them about their games. What we will undoubtedly discover is that a lot of kids are reluctant to talk about this, because they believe that any negative of the video game that they share with the parent will be used as ammo or justification to take the game away.
Yes.
And so what we know from addiction psychiatry is the first step to overcoming an alcohol addiction is not talking to your partner about how much it's ruining your marriage, because then the partner will get pissed and they'll be like, you need to quit. You go to a psychiatrist's office, you tell them alcohol is ruining my life. And then the psychiatrist doesn't say, let's empty out all your bottles. The psychiatrist says, what should we do about that?
Okay.
right? To be able to sit with all that negativity, acknowledge all that negativity. And then the cool thing is that 99% of kids know that games are causing some problems.
Okay.
It's just
Interesting.
the situation is that they can never afford to admit it because I'm giving my parents ammo. Because right? So our kids know, like, even if you talk to teenagers who game all day and that's all they want to do, if you ever sit down and ask your kid, do you want to have a boyfriend or girlfriend? Do you want one day? Are you happy with the way that you look? Like, the answer to those questions is going to be no. The problem is that they can never afford to admit it to you.
Okay.
And this is what's so frustrating for parents is you see they're ruining their life.
Right.
They see they're ruining. They absolutely know that they're ruining your life. The big irony is the more right you are, the more they will dig in their heels.
Okay.
They don't dig in their heels when you're wrong. They dig in their heels when you're right.
Okay.
Because if they admit you're right, they know what your solution is going to be, which is to take away the video game. And then you're left with a vacuum. You haven't given them a solution to actually fix their life. You're just trying to take this thing away. So once you understand what the core reason your child is playing games, then it's a conversation about, okay, so do you want to change this in some way? We're not talking about cutting back on gaming. Let's just talk about the goals that you have. So if you want to be more physically fit, if you want to be more comfortable in your body, if you don't want to be embarrassed at the end of the year, your high school goes on a beach day and you always don't want to go because you're embarrassed about your body. Like, do you want to change that? I can help you.
Yeah.
And then something beautiful happens. Now it's not about like cutting back on the gaming. It's about building the life that you want to, and what can we do? Okay, like what would you like to do to feel more comfortable in your body? Like, do you want to do gymnastics? Do you want to do martial arts? Like, what do you want to do? And the kid says, okay, let's try martial arts. And then now y'all have something. So now what started to happen, we haven't talked about cutting back on the gaming, but now twice a week we're going to martial arts class, which means by definition, they're not playing for those 2 hours that it takes to go and come and things like that. Right. And so then what we really do is build an alliance where the child y'all decide on some shared goals together. And that's where you start. So a huge mistake that parents make is that they try to achieve their goals. I know it sounds crazy. Not a good idea. So we recommend something called the 25% rule, which is this is where you are, let's say. This is where you want to go.
Yeah.
Cut that in half and cut that in half again. And this is what your target is.
That's great.
So ask less of your kids and build on one success followed by another success, followed by another success. And so it's really just about forming an alliance and stopping to fight against this person. And then both of y'all's energies are working together. And then we teach a lot of very practical tips about boundary setting and reinforcement, where a lot of parents don't realize that what they're doing is making the problem worse, not making the problem better.
Okay. Wow. I that sounds like a great game plan. And it sounds like you're teaching skills that, I mean, like you said, this will serve them for a lifetime, right? This idea of, okay, let's add in good things that we're wanting instead of focusing so much on cutting out the thing that I'm addicted to, that makes me feel good, that suppresses my pain. So what else do we as parents have to offer? So I think that's really encouraging.
Yeah. And I think that's what it means to be a healthy gamer. Right. So games are a source of recreation, enjoyment, to some degree, community. But the big difference between an unhealthy gamer and a healthy gamer. So I play video games still.
Okay.
I play video games with my kids.
Okay.
The big difference is that it used to be that video games were the primary way that my brain got what it needed. And now my brain gets what it needs through all kinds of other activities. And so my fundamental psychological needs, my fundamental direction in life is satisfied by the real world. And then games can be fun.
Okay. And I mean, can we get to a point where kids can completely manage this on their own? Or, I mean, as long as they're in our house, 18 and under, is there still going to be an element that they still don't have the full capacity to manage something addictive in your home? And as a parent, we're still going to have to offer quite a bit of oversight with it.
So I think that depends on the kid, right? So let's just think about it this way. So I'll work with 24-year-olds who are still kids. Mm-hmm. And so they are able to self-manage. I've worked with some 16-year-olds and 17-year-olds who are able to basically completely self-manage. But generally speaking, our approach is really solid boundary setting and then really solid boundary enforcement. And I don't know if your child will achieve full independence under the age of 18. I've seen it, but I would say it is the exception rather than the rule. But what is absolutely possible is for y'all to have a much healthier balance where 80 or 90% of the time they are like able to do a pretty good job and you really only have to step in rarely.
Okay. And let's set a realistic timeline. So if I'm recognizing this addiction in my kids, I want to start this process. Realistically, how long might it take for us to get to our goal where mostly they're able to manage it on themselves and it's not such a big battle in our household anymore?
I would say realistically, 6 months is the absolute minimum. 10 years is the top end. I'm serious.
So the rest of the time they're in your house.
I mean, even beyond that. So,
Yeah.
so like, like I think that's where if you just look at what's the outcome, and I wish I could say, yeah, 3 months and you're done. And that's another big mistake parents make. They're so terrified of the consequences of gaming that they try to rush the process.
Sure.
And so one of the things that a lot of parents struggle with, and we teach parents, like you have to accept that your children can fail. And we don't want to accept that, right? We want to try to prevent it. And by all means, try to prevent it. But if your kid wants to fail, they're going to fail. Like you can't protect them from it, which is really, really scary. But that's like one of the big lessons I had to learn. It's a big lesson that we teach our community, is that if you really want to teach them responsibility, like you can't have the safety net, right? Like, because the kids will just utilize it. And so one of the big things on the path to independence is actually failure, which a lot of parents are not emotionally able to stomach for their children.
Yeah, no, that's true. Okay, I have two more questions for you because often as parents, we don't see eye to eye with our spouse on this. So two questions around that. What is perfect, ideal situation, perfect world? What age would be that you would allow kids to start playing video games? Is there if we haven't gone down this path yet, and again, I think sometimes husbands and wives aren't on the same page with this, what age would be your ideal age when you would start introducing this to your kids?
Great question. So the first thing I want to say is we have a whole section devoted to talking to your spouse, because that is such a common problem. And even if there's an intact household, it's a common problem. It gets way trickier in single parent households, cases of divorce or separation, which is like 40 to 50% of households now. So it's a huge, huge problem. So we offer specific techniques to like deal with your spouse.
Great.
Second thing is I think that the premise of the question is not how I think. So there is not a minimum age. So everyone thinks it's like access is binary. So I think it is the conversations that you have ahead of time that are way more important. So people will ask me all the time, what's the minimum age to start playing? I started playing games with my kids at like 2.5. And so the whole point is to teach them how to do it responsibly. So I think that a minimum age is not necessarily like at this point, because if you really think about it, you have so much more control. You can create so many more healthy habits with a 2.5-year-old,
Sure.
as opposed to a 10-year-old or 20-year-old. And when I talk about it takes a decade to overcome addiction, it takes a decade to overcome addiction if you've got a 17-year-old who's really addicted. It doesn't take a decade if you've got a 7-year-old who has barely gotten any exposure.
Yeah.
So interestingly enough, like with my kids, I start early because I think this is like a big challenge for them. And I want their brain, if we sort of think about when do I want to teach my child how to sing or paint or whatever, the earlier we start, the better they're going to absorb the lessons. So I started super early. That being said, I think the main thing is not about the age that you start, but the way that you start. So I'll invite my children to understand their own desires and emotions. So like on a Saturday morning, they're like 6 and 8 now. What do they want to do? They want to play games first thing in the morning. So we'll ask them, hey, like, how much do you want to play? We want to play a lot. How are you going to feel after 30 minutes? How are you going to feel after 1 hour? How long do you want to do it? And they'll say, oh, we just want to do it for 20 minutes, because they know that if they ask for a small amount, that I'll say yes. And if they ask for a huge amount, I'll say no. So already the deception begins. So I said, okay, you guys can play for an hour. And they're like, what? And then as 30 minutes go in, I'll stop and I'll say, let's pause for a second. Are y'all still having fun? Do y'all want to do something else? Do you want to play longer? They want to play longer. And then the hour is up. And of course, what do they want to do? They want to play longer. So that's when we set a boundary and we say, okay, we said we were going to play for an hour. Y'all asked for 20 minutes. We gave you an hour. So let's stop and then let's go to the playground. And then this is a big step that a lot of parents miss. They think that once we've stopped playing the game, we've won. No. That's a big mistake. So if we really look at behavioral reinforcement and learning, what we really want to do is after they go to the playground for 30 minutes, I'll ask them, hey, do y'all want to go home? They'll be like, no, we want to stay at the playground. oh, interesting. Let's pause and understand. So is it a good idea that we went to the playground? Are y'all having fun? Is it okay that daddy forced you to stop? And they're like, yeah, it was totally fine. Do you all want to go back and play right now? No, we want to stay at the playground.
Yeah.
So I think a big part of it is really, and this is where a lot of parents miss, and it's not their fault because we've never needed to do this before. We've never had a pervasive addictive substance that has invaded every corner of our lives. So what we really recommend is talking before. Everyone's focused on when do I give it to them. 50% of the work is done. 30% is work done before they even get access. 30% is done after they get access. Let's talk about what it's like. Are you enjoying it? Are you not enjoying it? What are the consequences that you're seeing? Here are the consequences that I'm seeing. So and I think that's really the right way to build it, is really helping them understand from start to finish, almost like a science experiment. How do you feel when you play for 4 hours?
Yeah.
Are you even having fun at the end? Because they're not having fun at the end.
Yeah.
They just don't want to stop. And how do they understand that? Like, well, that's crazy. You don't want to stop, but you're not having fun. What do you think about that?
Yeah.
And it's amazing what 6-year-olds are capable of. Like, I think we oftentimes underestimate what they're capable of.
Wow. And this is going to cause us as adults to be so much more introspective too. How do I feel after a half hour of scrolling on Instagram? Not super great, right? So I can see how it benefits everyone in the household. One final question. What if my spouse is the addicted gamer or an adult in my household? How do we start to talk about that?
Yeah, so that's great. So like I said, we have a whole chapter on that. But I think that the methodologies that are used with your kids can also be used with your spouse. Now, some of the power dynamics are going to shift, and we literally go into that because this is such a common thing.
Yes,
and I'd say the book is absolutely worthwhile for people who are struggling with spouses, siblings, et cetera, right? So we've worked with all those people.
Awesome.
And so the core foundation, so the core of it remains the same. The big difference is the power dynamics and how much independence your spouse has. So as a parent of like, a 10-year-old, you get to decide what games they have access to. You do not get that with your spouse. That's why our program, though, is so successful, because I work primarily with people who I have no ability to set limits in their life. Zero.
Sure. Yeah.
Right. And we've helped literally millions of gamers at this point. And so the key thing is just going back to that root of how do you feel about it? Let's just have an open-ended conversation without judgment. Help me understand, what do you think about it? Do you wish your life was different? Do you wish our life was different? And where would you like to start? Like here, and then if you have a problem, you can say it transparently. But I think we teach certain skills about how to ask questions. We use certain evidence-based techniques from addiction psychiatry, which I think parents didn't need to know before, but we're also seeing a social skills atrophy for people who use a lot of games where they're not good communicators. So we need to actually buff up our communication skills beyond normal to be able to compensate for your child's inability to communicate or your partner's inability to communicate.
Wow.
And
That's awesome.
So the foundation is actually like exactly the same, which is let's understand non-judgmentally, like what this is doing for you, what you like about it, what you don't like about it. And is there some common ground that we can start with?
Yeah. That's so good. Well, okay, I thought of one more question, though. We hear a lot of buzz about first-person shooter games. So will you allow your kids to play first-person shooter games?
Yeah.
Okay. So is that something we need to be concerned about as parents, or as long as we're doing games in moderation?
What's the buzz? Tell me about the buzz.
Well, that it leads to our kids are going to, become people that are going to use guns on other people or something if they're playing these games, or be that they're, I guess maybe more so that they're becoming desensitized to it, that I can live in a world where I can shoot people and there aren't the consequences that there are in the real world. And so I'm getting some kind of false sense of reality about what shooting a person actually means.
Yeah. So I think all of those concerns make a lot of sense. And fortunately, the data doesn't really back it up. So there have been a few meta-analyses that basically show that playing violent video games does not lead to violence in real life. It turns out that actually the more sociopathic you are, the more it seems to have a mitigating effect of violence in the real world, right? So if you have those sociopathic tendencies, really fascinating study. If you have those sociopathic tendencies, you kind of get them out in the video game, and then so it actually correlates in the opposite depending on how sociopathic you are. Interesting. So, these are preliminary studies, but generally speaking, we have some pretty good meta-analyses that show that playing video games doesn't lead to more violence. It does lead to increased feelings of aggression.
Okay.
But if you have a gamer and you've played video games online, you know that you're going to get pissed when you play. Like, that's just part of it. Like, sweaty, angry nerds is a big part of gamers understand that.
Okay.
So, and I think, unfortunately, like this focus on violence has almost been a little bit of a red herring. So I know that a lot of people have like regulated, okay, this is like 18 plus based on violence. But I think the real tragedy is we've not regulated based on addictive potential. We don't worry about the addictive potential. Parents are not concerned when they look at a video game, what they look for is a gun. There can be flowers and pots and kitty cats, and your kid can still be addicted to it for 20 hours a day, and it can still ruin their life.
Okay.
So I think that even though it seems very contrary, if we kind of think about it, like, I don't know if you watch violent movies like Die Hard, it doesn't make you any more likely to shoot someone. Right. So I think that there may be some degree of desensitization, but generally speaking, that is not the main danger that we see. And even if you look at things like psychological analysis of people like mass shooters, like many of them are gamers, but 98% of people under the age of 30 are gamers.
Sure.
And what we can absolutely see is in these cases of extreme violence, there are other kinds of things going on, and we work a lot with those people too. So we kind of have seen all sides of the spectrum.
Yeah. So as we wrap up, what would you say to the mom who's listening who might feel like, well, I feel like I've ruined my child. I have a teenager. All they do is play video games. Have I ruined their brain? Have I ruined their social skills? What hope is there if we begin to work on this now?
Okay. The first thing that I would say is that if you're afraid that your child's life has been ruined, you haven't ruined it. Remember that on one side is mom, right? And on the other side is a multi-billion-dollar industry that employs neuroscientists, behavioral economists, programmers, AIs. Like, you are just completely outgunned, so not your fault. Is the situation dire? 100%. So here's what I'd say. You haven't ruined your child's life. Your child's life is not over. Like, I failed out. I started med school at the age of 28. Most of my friends from high school who became doctors, they were done at the age of 26. And I remember going to a Christmas party when I was 26 years old and talking to my friends who I went to high school with. And I was like, they were like, what are you up to? And I was like, I'm applying to medical school. And then I asked them, what are you up to? Oh, I'm graduating. Right. So like, I started late, like, I ended up okay. So I think it's about getting there in the end is the most important thing. Recognize that you've been outgunned. It's okay. Next thing is recognize that your projection about the future assumes that your child is not working with you. Right? It's that I can't overcome my child. The future calculation, right now you're playing a versus game. You're like stepping into the ring against your child. The moment that the two of y'all get on the same team, the entire outlook for the future changes. So what we've seen time and time and time again is parents who believe they have ruined their children, kids who have very dire circumstances. And I am where I am today because my parents screwed up. Right? So they weren't able to help me in the way that I needed, and they tried everything, and I still ended up okay. It's just part of the journey of parenting, and your kids have to grow up, and it's hard, and their life may not be perfect. The other thing is that, like, life ain't a race. Like, I don't know where we got this idea that, oh, like, I want my kid to be, done at 21.
Yeah. Well, social media, right? Like, what are all my friends going to think? Right.
All that kind of stuff, right? So your child has their own unique path in life that bumps early on. So this is where a lot of people get worried. But I've sort of noticed, I think it's way better to have an early life crisis than it is to have a midlife crisis. You want to go through all of the sweat and the toil. And like, I struggled a lot in my early years, and I feel so tranquil now, right? Like I'm 41, and like now it's like everything's chill. Like, we figured it out. I had my trials and tribulations. So when like I got, bad grades in med school, or if a professor didn't like me, everything would fall apart. Your child will be so much more resilient after this journey. They'll grow so much more. And there's so many positives that we can't see.
That's good. Yeah.
And so don't give up hope, right? It's okay to like set hope down for a little while and not feel it in that moment, but your life isn't over. And I know that parents, I've yet to meet someone who can truly see the future. And if you as a parent can see the future and you know that the next 60 years of your child's life has been ruined, like, wow, you're a first.
Yeah.
We can all feel that way, but that's our feelings that are shaping the way that we see the world. That's our stress. and don't give up hope. I mean, I don't think I've seen a single truly hopeless case of video game addiction. And at this point, I've seen hundreds.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, so good to visit with you today. We will absolutely link to your book down below and your other ways to follow you as well. And hopefully we can catch up again in the future, because I think this is really encouraging to a lot of parents.
Yeah, I hope so. The only reason it feels hopeless is because we haven't been doing it right. And as a parent, I'm sure that y'all understand that things can feel really frustrating until you get the knack of it. And then suddenly things become easy.
Yeah. Well, I think you're giving us a good game plan. So
yeah, like potty
awesome.
training, breastfeeding, terrible twos. Like once you get the knack of it, things become so easy.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Thank you for joining us on the Minimal Mom Podcast. If you enjoyed today's show, please subscribe, leave a review, and share it with a friend who might find value in embracing a simplified lifestyle.